Welcome everyone to Chart's webinar series. Today I would like to welcome Nick Howe from Area 9 Lyceum and James Notaro from Gilmore Global. Welcome.
Thank you, Tara. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And I brought along with me one of our strategic partners, Nick Howe from Area 9. He's going to be covering the webinar today and talking about adaptive learning. And as we all know, we are living in some very interesting times. And I felt that adaptive learning platform was going to be really relevant for today's conversation, being that instructor-led training has really been put to the side and we're looking for more effective ways to deliver content. So I wanted to start with just a brief introduction about Gilmore Global. So Gilmore Global is a global content management and delivery company. We have strategic partners that we bring in for different types of delivery, whether it be mobile delivery or learning experience platform, or the adaptive learning, which is much more custom based on the program itself. So let's say that you're doing a manager training program or a new hire program, or it could be for back of house food safety. Adaptive learning programs are going to be custom built based on those needs. So when it comes to our offerings, they really look at what your needs are. It could also be a global supply chain where you're incorporating tangible printed products and wearables and other types of items. But for today's webinar, we're really going to focus on adaptive learning, and really excited about bringing in Nick. Nick has been in the industry for 20 plus years and is really excited about talking with all of you in terms of how we can leverage adaptive learning in the hospitality industry. So without further ado, Nick, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone. Looks like we got just over 70 people online so far. Thank you all for participating. I know for hospitality, this is a particularly stressful time. I live down in South Florida, and we got the notification yesterday that all bars and clubs are closed, and all restaurants, some can stay open, but with 50% occupancy limits, and a lot of it is moving towards home delivery, and I'm sure that's going to happen across the rest of the US if it hasn't already. When we originally planned this webinar, COVID was still very early. Clearly things have changed dramatically since then, but it makes what we're going to talk about today, I think, particularly important. Some key things about how people learn and what we can do to help them learn better. We'll touch this when we get to the end of the session as well, but as a service to pretty much everybody out there in the L&D industry, we have released a free Coronavirus 2019 course. We worked with Harvard Medical School and others to put this together, so this is medically sanctioned information. We're going to make that available free to all of you as a follow-up to this webinar. You'll just be able to self-register. And if you do like it, if you find it useful and you want to make it available to your organizations, then either they can just sign up using that same link, or we can make a SCORM course available for you to put in your own learning management systems if you want to help spread the word and make sure that everybody is up to speed on this. And it will give you a personal experience of what this whole adaptive learning thing is that I'm going to talk about for the next 40 minutes or so. So pay attention, and then hopefully you get to put some of this into practice. So just starting out, I know we have a lot of trainers on this session, and we're going to be talking a lot about online learning. And what we've seen is generally a shift across the industry. Here we are in 2020, and there is still a huge role for pure classroom instruction to play. But what we have seen is an increasing move initially to online, but now to blended especially. And we see that trend continuing. So classroom training is absolutely not going to go away, but there will, I think, be a shift in emphasis between what gets taught in the classroom and the types of experiences that get delivered face-to-face versus the things that are done very much self-paced online, whether that's on a laptop or on a computer or on a tablet or on a phone. So that's a macro level trend that I think is affecting all of the industries out there, and it's definitely going to affect hospitality. So today we're going to talk about, first of all, the problem with people. There are some particular things about the way that human brain works and about cognition that often as trainers and as learning specialists, we don't necessarily always appreciate or find it quite difficult to deal with. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those challenges. We'll talk about adaptive and how it solves some of those problems. And then particularly for this audience, how adaptive blends with instructor-led training to provide the best possible opportunities for the employees, for the workers to become as capable as possible. I'm going to start out just by talking about 3 use cases that will help maybe set the context for what we're going to talk about. So one of our clients is a fast casual dining chain throughout the US and Canada, about 8,000 employees. And they had been delivering a lot of their training face-to-face, but they wanted to be able to scale and achieve some more cost efficiency through e-learning. However, they absolutely did not want to push the same content to everybody. That has been the approach in our industry for nearly 30 years now. And the world has moved on. There are better ways to deliver online learning than simply packaging it up as a linear course and pushing it out there as content. They were particularly interested in being able to personalize the learning to meet the needs of each employee. One of the other really interesting things was that the CEO remembered going on some face-to-face leadership development training and could remember virtually nothing from attending that course. And one of his concerns was that the organization is spending a lot of money on training every year. How effective is it really? Is that teaching actually sticking with the frontline workers and the managers across the organization? So as part of that, they developed actually using our technology, a 30-module leadership program that is powered by this adaptive learning technology that we'll go on and talk about as part of this webinar. So absolutely, this is beginning to be used in hospitality. We've seen more penetration in other industries. Hospitality is a little bit late to the game, but it is definitely coming and is absolutely applicable both to general leadership and manager training, soft skills training, but also particularly to frontline workers. A second case study is outside of hospitality, but on a very relevant subject, hospitality, around safety. Now, in this case, it was quite high stakes safety training. They had been delivering it as 2-day instructor-led training that led to a certificate, and that certificate was required to work. So it was mandatory for employees to go through that training before they could start working in this particular environment. Their big challenge, and again, this is very true in hospitality, they had a very diverse audience. Now, they were very extreme. They had PhD level engineers sitting in the same classroom as folks who never graduated high school, but everybody was required to have that same safety certificate. And those of you that are instructors will know this is a very common scenario. You have people, you've got 10, 20 people in a class. They all have differences. They all need different things. And as an instructor, it is tremendously challenging to meet the needs of the different people in your audience. Some are learning faster, some are learning slower, some come in with different experiences. How the heck do you try and get everybody exactly what they need? In their instance, this was an example of moving to blended. So they absolutely saw the value of the face-to-face interactions, but a lot of that classroom training had really just been knowledge-based instruction. They were teaching people about something. So they moved about half the course into online modules, and again, made them adaptive, and kept that one day, but very much restructured it to focus on teamwork and role play. So letting the instructors, the facilitators, provide the maximum value for that face-to-face interaction, and moving just that general knowledge delivery to a self-paced that was able to adjust to meet the needs of the individual. And then the last case study, before we get into explaining how all this stuff works, is a US luxury retailer. They have stores across the US. They were doing rapid store expansions, and their product that they were selling through the stores was evolving quite quickly. So again, very similar challenges to what is faced in hospitality. Their approach to training had been to use the leaders in the stores and product specialists who were traveling around to onboard new workers as they came in. Again, the audience was very diverse. They had folks who had been working in other luxury stores, folks who'd been working in retail but not in the luxury sector, and then other employees that had never worked in retail at all. They were very dependent on the store leader training, which meant it was somewhat inconsistent. It varied from store to store. It was taking productive time away from those store leaders. And it was quite slow to roll out new changes to products across the organization as people had to travel around. They moved to adaptive, but also supported that by targeted coaching. And the big benefit to them was directly as a result of not changing the content of what they were teaching, but the way they were teaching it. They saw an increase in revenue per employee and in revenue per store. So we can get very clear links between different ways of helping people become more proficient and direct bottom line impact, top and bottom line impact to the business. So the problem with people. First issue is something called Dunning-Kruger. We're very high on the idea of using research to drive how we make decisions about how we go about teaching people. This is research that dates back 20 years, 1999, David Dunning, Justin Kruger. They put people through a number of tests, and they looked at how well did people perform. As you would in any organization, you're assessing competency for different folks in your organization. Some people are better, some people are worse. They then asked the question, how well do you think you did on this test? And they found something really interesting. Often the folks who performed the best underestimated how well they'd actually done. The folks who were kind of pretty good were pretty reasonable, pretty accurate about how well they'd done. The problem was that the people who didn't actually do very well significantly overestimate their ability to perform something. And this study has been repeated time and time and time again. If you get a bunch of people in a room, it's pretty difficult to do these days, but if you were to do that and you ask them, how good a driver are you? Something like 80% of people will say they're above average, which if you know anything about statistics, clearly can't be true. And if any of you have ever delivered a performance review to someone, you'll know that the people who are most surprised by the ratings are the ones who performed the worst, because people overestimate, significantly overestimate, low performers significantly overestimate their capability to do something. The consequence for the training environment is people often don't pay attention to things that you're trying to teach them because they think they already know it or they think they can already do it. And this is absolutely ubiquitous across everybody who goes through any kind of training environment. It applies as much to me and to you as it does to the folks that we're teaching. Quick answer to Tyler, yes, everybody will get a recording of this webinar. We can also make the deck available to you if you're interested in seeing that. So Dunning-Kruger is the first thing. People are really, really bad at knowing how good they are at something. Secondly, our friend Mr. Ebbinghaus, this is over 110 years old research now, but has been repeated time and time and time again. People forget things really quickly. One of the things that separates humans from most of the other animal kingdom is we're really good at learning things. But unfortunately, we're also really, really good at forgetting things. Partly because we get bombarded with so much, we just can't keep it all in and we have to let go of a lot of it. But we're not very good at deciding what to let go of. Typically, across every industry, and I'm sure this is true in hospitality, training is often treated as a one-time event. we teach you this thing, and then we go on and teach you something different. If you do not do reinforcement, and so that white curving line that goes from bottom left up to top right shows how much people are likely to retain if you go on and do subsequent repetitions. The idea is called deliberate practice or reinforcement. If you reinforce the thing that you're trying to teach over a period of time, the likelihood is people will retain it. If you only put people through a one-day class and then do not reinforce, the likelihood is they will probably forget most of what you taught them. They will probably forget 50 to 70% in as little as a day. And within 2 weeks, they've probably forgotten 90% of everything you talked about in class. Frightening statistic, but the research bears it out absolutely clearly. Third thing, again, more than 30 years old now. Bloom, any of you who have an instructional design background will know of Benjamin Bloom from the Bloom's taxonomy. But he did another piece of research, and he said, can we improve the learning experience for people who go through the classroom? And so that lower dashed line are the results you get if you put people through a test after you have taught them in a classroom. And some people do really well on the test. The horizontal axis is the further to the right you are, the better you did on the test. The further left, the poorer you did. So some people do really well out of a classroom experience, some people not so well. He asked the question, well, can we do any better than that? How can we help people learn better? And the answer is yes, if you incorporate questions into the classroom experience, and then as instructor, you do something about it. So by simply asking questions as you go through the classroom session, seeing whether people are actually learning the things you're teaching, and then adjusting your teaching to accommodate that, you can get significantly better outcome. You get that dotted line, which is shifted to the right. The average performance of your class goes up, and especially the lower performers perform much better. Now, that can be challenging in a classroom environment, but if you can make that work, you can get much better experiences. But that pales into insignificance with personal guidance. If you could do one-on-one tutoring for every person that you had to teach, you would get extraordinary results. The average performance of people who are tutored can be as much as the top 2% of the people who go through a general class. It is absolutely night and day. So the question we set out to answer is, can you create the learning outcomes that you would get from a tutor, but be able to deliver that in a self-paced way for 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 100,000 people at once? And the answer to that question is yes, you can. And the answer to that is something that is called adaptive learning. It's an online delivery method that adapts to meet the needs of every learner. And what we can use is technology to create the equivalent of that one-on-one experience. And the way we do that is by using data. We use a lot of questions and problems and exercises, and we pair that with intelligent pieces of software. And the best way, the simplest way to think about it is just to think about maps versus Google Maps. For thousands of years, we used paper maps to navigate the world, allowed us to conquer civilizations, got us everywhere we need to be. These days, if you want to get from point A to B, how many people go and reach for a paper map? Instead, you're going to pull out your phone and you're going to use Google Maps, because Google Maps is so much better. It knows where you are. It knows what the traffic is doing. It will reroute you if you get lost. It will give you the best path to get to where you are trying to get to. Traditional maps don't have a clue where you are. They don't know what's going on with traffic. They can't help you if you get stuck unless you know how to use the map really, really well. That's the equivalent between traditionally learning and adaptive learning. Adaptive learning adapts in real time to help you learn more quickly and to learn more, instead of simply putting content in front of you and hoping that you would learn from something. one thing that we don't think about often as trainers is what is going on in people's minds whilst we're trying to teach them. We often think of teaching someone as being a simple scale from incompetence, they don't know something, they can't do something, we need to make them competent. But there's another dimension. There's this unconscious, conscious dimension. And in the top right, you've got folks who are consciously competent. They already know some things. They can already do some things. If we try and teach these people, we're just wasting their time. They're already competent. Why are we spending time trying to teach them something they already know? In the bottom right are folks who are consciously incompetent. They know they don't know this stuff. These are the folks we need to teach, or the things we need to teach to the class. That's kind of obvious. We often ignore what happens on the left-hand side, though. There is unconscious competence. That sometimes people can actually do things, they just don't realize they can, or they lack confidence in their ability to do those things. Often it's less about teaching them how to do something and much more about just reinforcing their confidence in their ability to do that thing. The real killer, and this is arguably where most errors occur in the workplace, is unconscious incompetence. This is Dunning-Kruger. This is thinking you know how to do something when in fact you don't. We train something like 20,000 doctors a year, and we use the adaptive techniques that we're just about to go on and show you, and something like 18% of everything that doctors know, they don't actually know. They hold misconceptions about. So your average doctor, 1 in 5 things that they think they know about how to diagnose something, they actually don't. And it may be because things have changed since they went to medical school, learning has evolved over time, maybe they were never taught it and they just picked things up through reading or whatever, and that's now incorrect. Maybe they were taught something that was always incorrect all along. So we absolutely shouldn't blame them for holding these misconceptions, but we absolutely need to overcome them. So tip number 1, if you remember nothing else from this session, if you have an important medical problem, make sure you get a second opinion, because there's a 1 in 5 chance the doctor might not know what they're talking about. And so instead, what we do through adaptive learning is try and make sure that not only do we build competence, but we build conscious competence. We help people understand not only where their gaps are, but help them realize the misconceptions they hold and bring their entire competency base up to being conscious competence. So how the heck does all this stuff work? It is a combination of technology along with the content that you would normally use to deliver. But it is very designed learning. We have a platform called Area 9 Rhapsode that encapsulates the algorithms that sit with the content that allow you to create these personalized self-learning outcomes. The first thing is learning objectives. Everything we do, everything that you would do to address this challenge starts out with what is it we are trying to teach. Again, there's nothing special here. Those of you that have been building content should be doing this anyway. Start with the outcomes in mind, figure out what it is we want people to know or do. Secondly, we have the learning content, what we call learning resources. How would you teach someone how to do the thing that you want them to do? But thirdly, and crucially, is assessment. And this is not simply testing someone at the end of a teaching process to see if they learnt it. This is using questions and problems as part of the teaching process. And again, some of you may well be doing this as part of your face-to-face interactions. But incorporating this into self-paced learning is quite a different way of delivering self-paced learning and has huge, huge benefits. So, what does an adaptive learning course look like? This is our authoring engine. This is a course that we offer to the hospitality industry around wine and wine service. And here we're focusing on the wine service module. And you'll see a number of things on the screen. So down the left-hand side, we have a series of learning objectives, the particular tasks or knowledge items that we are trying to get the learner to learn as they go through this self-paced learning. On the right-hand side, and I'll show you examples of these in a moment, on the right-hand side in blue, we have the learning content, the slides, the videos, whatever it happens to be that we would use to teach people how to do these things. In green, and this is where the real difference starts to happen, are the probes. These are questions or problems. And they simply answer, how would you know if someone could do this? What evidence would you want to collect? Now, this is online learning. So when you start getting into practical examples, that can be somewhat challenging, but there are absolutely ways to solve that problem. And so a learning resource might be a video that describes how to do something. And in this case, in this wine service module, we work directly with a sommelier to provide best practice on not only the knowledge about different wine and wine varietals, but also about the service aspects of doing that. It might just be normal textual or graphical content that we're delivering to them. One of the things that you will notice is we have these, what we call confidence buttons in green, orange, and red. And so when we put, one of the problems with online learning is it can be quite passive and learners can tune out. That's one of the problems that we'll face right now with this COVID epidemic. A lot of people are looking at the instructor-led training and saying, can we just move this online? The trouble is you take the instructor out of the equation and you lose a lot of the value that the trainer provides in terms of that interactivity and engagement. So one of the techniques we use is asking the learner to reflect on what it is that they're seeing on screen. Is this something, actually, yeah, I already knew this, or I think I got it, but I'm still not quite sure, or maybe I don't get it. I don't understand what it is you're trying to teach me. This is particularly important when we start looking at questions. Now, this is a simple multiple choice question, but the question could be any kind of problem that you want to set, as long as we can get some feedback about how well the learner knows something or can do something. And here, again, as well as responding to the question, we're also asking them to reflect on their response, which is hugely powerful. Simply getting someone to stop and think, do I really know this? Am I actually confident in this? Has massive impacts on whether they learn something and how well they learn something. But it's also data that we feed to the adaptive engine. Because if I respond to this question and get it wrong, then if I thought I knew the answer versus I had no idea and I was just guessing, they're two very different types of individual. And we have to help them in different ways. And the reality is that everybody is somewhere on this chart all the time. Regardless of what you're trying to teach, for any individual, I'll guarantee that they already know some of the things that you're trying to teach them. I will guarantee that there are clearly some gaps that you need to fill, some of the orange things. And I will guarantee that there are some things that they think they know already, but in fact they don't. And so we need to gather all that information as you would if you were trying to tutor someone. So we look at how well did you do when you tried to answer the question? How well do you think you knew the answer to that? How long did you spend responding to the question? How long did you spend reflecting on it? How well have you been doing up until this point? And have you been struggling up until now? Have you been doing well up until now? And so when you get to the point where the learner presses the next button, instead of simply moving on to the next thing that the designer put into the course, the system is going to calculate, actually, where should we go next? Should we move on to the next thing? Or should we maybe go back and cover something we've already covered because we thought the learner had mastered that, but in fact they haven't? Should we show them some content? Should we ask a question? In exactly the same way that a tutor is constantly thinking about what is the next best thing I can do to help this person master this thing. And what you get out of that is not a linear path. You get a very convoluted path where the system is making decisions. You can see this started out relatively linearly. We went through a series of learning objectives, that straight line at the top, where this learner was progressing quite well, but then they started to struggle and the system started to decide, actually, we need to go other places in this course. And we can't simply keep going through linearly. Some real world examples of what that looks like. And I'm sure that all of the folks that you are teaching will behave exactly in this way. Here we have 3 learners who all took the same course at the same time, roughly a year ago. And you will see that A, the paths are definitely not linear. B, the paths are very different. And C, you'll see that some of the bubbles are different sizes. And those are where learners struggled with content. Each one of these bubbles is an individual learning objective that they were trying to master. And you can see that particularly the learner on the right really struggled with something. Let me just have a quick look at this question. With this non-linear learning process, do you find that content creators have to make more content to teach the same idea? No. So one of the benefits of this approach is that you can still stick with exactly the same content. And adding that level of intelligence helps the learner. Now, if you can add more content and you can add multiple questions, then the algorithm has more to work with, and so it will perform better. But we recommend you not doing that initially. We recommend that you put in the minimum that you think you can get away with. And in the background, we're collecting data about exactly which bits of the course did learners struggle with. And so now as a content developer, I can focus in on, look, it seems like a lot of people are really struggling with this thing. Did I mess up the development on this? Is that content really trying to teach the thing that we're asking about? Maybe we just need to present the information in a different way. Maybe we've got a video, but maybe it's not as good as we could. Maybe we need some animations or some static assets. Or maybe we just need a different way of asking that question or setting that problem. But you can do that after the fact and evolve the content in real time. So, and we're getting into the last 10 minutes or so of the presentation. So we've got 3 learners, all had a very different experience, although the underlying content was exactly the same. They all achieved 100% proficiency. One of the big differences between this type of learning and almost every other is our goal is to get the learner to demonstrable proficiency. And we don't necessarily care how long it takes you. Now, I know there are implications for hourly workers and various other things, and there are ways to mitigate some of those challenges. But our goal is not simply to put content in front of you and have a checkbox that, yes, we got to the end of the course. Our goal is to make sure that every single employee is 100% proficient on the thing that you're trying to teach them. But what is obvious is the amount of time varies significantly, and we typically see about a factor of 4 ratio. Some folks will get through the material, through those questions, those problems, that content really, really quickly. And in this particular case, the learner on the left did it in as little as 8 minutes. The learner on the right took 4 times as long. They still achieved 100% proficiency, but they needed more help and more support to get there. And the learner in the middle is kind of the median, somewhere in between the two. By adding adaptivity to your content, we typically see the amount of time reduced by about a factor of 2. So if you had a 1-day stand up and talk at people type of training course, which I'm sure nobody does because we all know that's not great, but if you did, then instead of that taking 6 or 8 hours, if you instead allowed that content to be delivered in a self-paced way with adaptivity, you would see your median learners, your average learners, probably get to proficiency in 3 or 4 hours, with some learners as little as 2 hours. The question from Christine, would this be a good place for an instructor or a coach or a trainer to find areas where the learner might need additional tutoring? And the answer is absolutely yes to that. And I was going to cover this later, but I'll cover it now. So as you can see, you've got 3 different people, and assuming this is some pre-work to a class you're going to deliver, then these people are all coming in with measured proficiency. So you've got a great starting point as a trainer. You can see evidence that actually people did master the material in preparation for this in-person element. But clearly you've got 3 very different people here. And you can see in the data, as part of the reporting, that learner number 3 particularly struggled with this topic, and learner number 2 particularly struggled with these couple of things. So if you've got the bandwidth and if you've got the skill to do that, you can maybe keep an eye on these individuals as you go through your instructor session and make sure that you're keeping an eye on them if you're getting to a part that's relevant to that particular topic. Likewise, learner number 1, this may well be the hidden star in the class. You may well be able to call on this person because you can see from the online learning, they absolutely knocked this out of the park. And one of the things that you can tell from the data is because we use all these questions and problems, you essentially get a virtual pre-test of how much people knew before they started the training. And one of the reasons why that path is so linear, or relatively linear for learner number 1, is that they knew nearly 90% of the material before they started taking the course. And we just topped up a few little things. Now, we demonstrated proficiency across everything, but there were only a couple of things we needed to top up on. Whereas the other 2 learners, even though they struggled, they already knew half the material. So this is where a lot of the time savings come from. They were able to demonstrate, yes, I know the answer to that, I can do that. But one of the other big differences is learner number 2, and this is real data, remember, I'm not making this up, this is real data. Learner number 2 was 41% unconsciously incompetent. 41% of the time they thought they knew how to respond to something, when in fact they didn't. This is the nightmare person in your class who just everything you're saying goes completely over their head. Now, with the adaptive learning, it can go back and make sure that that learner is proficient. And it doesn't matter how many times it has to go back to that material. These are the people that are going to drag your class down. But you can guarantee with adaptive that we're actually preparing them properly to come to class. Now, you may still have challenges, but nowhere near as many as if you'd simply given them a normally learning course or said, read this before you come to class. So what is the benefit of taking what would otherwise be normal online content and adding this layer of adaptivity to it? First of all, it generally speaking cuts training time in about half. So you can give a lot of productive time back to the workers. It creates demonstrably higher levels of proficiency. You and the learner have evidence that they can know these things. You get kind of certification or assessment for free as part of that learning process. It fixes those misconceptions that are typically hidden and you don't even realize. You can be teaching someone in class and you have no idea that actually there's some fundamental piece of knowledge that they really have a misconception about that is coloring their thinking about what it is you're trying to teach them. And it's a highly interactive way of learning. We're constantly checking for their feedback. And so it doesn't suffer from many of the boredom problems that typically learning has. And ultimately, because we're saving time and we're improving proficiency, you get much more transfer onto the job. It makes the instructor's time easier when they're going on and adding, supplementing the online component, and you get better transfer into the workplace. And as I said, just wrapping this up, it's very data rich. Every single minute we're capturing data from the learner. And the good thing is you don't have to do anything. So as content developers, you still focus on just developing the content. Everything else that I've talked about is done automatically by the software. So the software is interacting with the learner. It's capturing that data. It's storing that data. It's using that data. But the data is there for you as an instructor or as a content developer or as a manager to go in and look at and say, wow, this learner really struggled with this. Maybe we should give them a bit more help or coaching, or here's a hidden star that we didn't even know about. Now, the one extra piece of work you would have to do as a developer, and hopefully it's obvious from this screen, is in addition to the content, in addition to the things in blue that you would normally create, you do have to add questions. And for some people, that can be relatively easy to do. Unfortunately, it's quite difficult to write good questions. So there is definitely some skill around that. But any of you that know how to write a good quiz that you would normally put in a classroom or on a course, or any of you that have ever been involved in assessment or certification, it's exactly the same set of techniques that you would use. There's a few other common questions that sometimes come up, particularly if you've got more of a technical background. So can it work with the learning management system? I'm sure everybody is using something out there, and absolutely yes. So all of that power that I've talked about can just be delivered through a normal SCORM object that will work, Kevin, sorry, that will work with almost any LMS that's out there. If the LMS supports SCORM or LTI, which is something that's more used in higher education, but any LMS that supports SCORM, you can get all of the benefits that I talked about by publishing the course as a SCORM object and dropping it into the LMS. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Translation isn't necessarily a big issue in the US, but any of you maybe who have to deal with French Canadian or Spanish, then translation is built directly into the platform. We make it super easy for you to create multilingual versions of this. And one of the benefits is, because we break everything down, or you as a developer, if you're using our platform, we could do that for you, or you could do it yourself. Because we break everything down into these small nuggets, we can keep track of, if you change anything, only the bits that need to get retranslated. So it can dramatically reduce the cost of maintaining translated content. Yes, we do single sign-on. We won't bother with the technicalities of that today, but we can link to other non-LMS systems. Super easy to deploy. You can turn the system on in 5 minutes and immediately start building. It's just an authoring tool, but also has the capability to do all these magic things we talked about. And if you are half decent content developer to begin with, and you understand the basics of how to write a question and what a distractor might be, then you need no new skills in order to be able to do that. But if you did, then we can put you through exactly the same program that we put our own content developers through, that we call Area 9U. All right, so let me see if there's any other questions. Now Sonia put a thing in here about open-ended questions. Now, certainly if you want to ask open-ended questions in the question, then please do in the Q&A. If you had a scenario where you wanted to take advantage of adaptive, but there were certain aspects of this that really lend themselves more to an open-ended question. So you wanted to say, for example, that a customer has this complaint. What would you do in this scenario? And rather than give them a fixed set of choices, you wanted to see just open-ended, how would they respond? Then we have a way of putting the human in the loop in this. We have something called an activity probe that would let your student type in a long-form response, which you then as a facilitator or as an instructor could go back and score and say, actually, no, that wasn't the right thing to do in that scenario. But we can also, to help reduce your workload, give them what might be a best practice response and ask them to reflect. So they respond first. We then give them what might be an ideal or a best practice answer, and they reflect themselves. How well do you think you did against what our preferred best practice is? And again, simply that act of self-reflection can be hugely powerful for the learner. You could also, as part of a classroom environment, get peer feedback and have multiple people rate other people what they would do in that scenario. So although this is very much a self-paced way of learning, it's designed to be very complementary, either as pre-work, as a blended program, as reinforcement after an in-person component, or potentially in certain circumstances even used within the classroom environment. Becky says, could you please click on one of the green buttons again? I'm not sure I understand the question. If you could ask me that again, Becky, I will try and respond to that. In terms of follow-up, then we will, part of the price you pay for attending this is that we will be reaching out to you afterwards. But my colleague James is the go-to person if you want to find out more, and he can direct you to me and my colleagues at Area 9. Yep, and James will answer that in there. Were you talking, Becky, about one of these green buttons on here? Yes, okay. So what you would see behind one of those green buttons is a question. And I didn't include in the spirit of time, I didn't include some more screenshots about how you would author this, but basically there are a series of templates that you would use as an author to develop. Now this happens to be a multiple choice question, and it happens to be purely textual. But the questions themselves could incorporate, I mean, this is a piece of content, but could incorporate, the question could incorporate a video, or the question could incorporate pictures and images, or whatever it wants to be. And there are also many different types of questions. All the basic ones: fill in the blank, drag and drop, ranking, categorize. So if you had a process that someone needed to go through, you can get them to follow that process and check that they're doing it correctly. You could even build in, if you want to do animations or really complex things. We try and stay away from that because there's a lot of cost and effort associated with that that isn't necessarily always needed. We find that the highly interactive nature of this and the very granular nature actually gives you huge learning outcomes for relatively simple content that if you delivered normally would be deathly dull and boring, but because of the highly interactive nature of this actually gives you great engagement and great outcomes because the algorithms are working their magic in the scenes behind. So when the learner presses one of the 4 buttons on a question, it will branch to different places. Yes, but that is, the branching is not predetermined. So what's going to happen is, so one of these green things here, so we know about, say, cutting the foil in a corkscrew. This is a question about knowing that you should whereabouts to cut the foil. If you get this wrong, then the system is going to figure out, okay, so what should I do now when I press the next button? I'm going to give you the correct answer, but I'm then going to decide, should I just show you the slide and make you see it? Should I give you the option to look at the slide if you want? Or should I maybe just go back and talk and cover one of the other things we've already done and see if, by looking at maybe some of the related things, that's enough to get you to learn that. Now, ideally, we break things down, you would break things down sufficiently small so that often simply by interacting with the question, you can learn something. But if it's something more complex, this idea of scaffolding, being able to be assessed and to see content that's related to the thing that you're looking at, often can give you that nudge and that help to let you do that. So the algorithm has the freedom to decide what to show you and in what order. And that can be a really weird concept to get your head around, because as a developer, I put all this effort into putting all this in this order, and it really makes sense if I teach them this before I teach them that. Actually, the data doesn't show that. The data shows that everybody is so different that just because you think this is the right order to do these things absolutely does not transfer to everybody that you're trying to teach. And will they get it ultimately if you just do that way? Maybe. But if you can change the order, and react to how they're responding in real time, you get dramatically better outcomes. So, and the beauty is, of course, as a developer, you don't have to think about all that branching. You never have to answer the question, what happens if the learner does this? That's what the algorithms are for. So as a developer, I can focus on making really good content to drive just the outcomes that I'm looking for, and then doing a sanity check to say, how would I know if someone could really do this? And then as a developer, I'm done. The magic happens in real time as the learner interacts with all of that content, and you get these completely different paths. All of this branching happens without you, or in fact without the learner realizing that all this stuff is going on in the background. In the same way you don't know what's going on in the head of the tutor when they're trying to help you learn something. You just know that they're going to help you do that. All right. So as I said before, you are going to get a follow-up, and while I'm talking, think about any other questions. As I said before, you're all going to get an opportunity. It's completely up to you, and it's completely free. We're going to send you a link for you to take the coronavirus course that covers symptoms and how to avoid and what to do if you get it and all those types of things. That is all sanctioned by the medical profession, but it's built on top of that adaptive engine. So you are going to get the exact experience that I just talked about, and hopefully it will be valuable to you. So if you already know some things about COVID and you've picked it up in the media and all the rest of it, then you'll be able to say, yeah, I know that, bang, 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 and you'll be able to get through it really quickly. But if there are things that maybe you thought you knew, but in fact are not actually correct. I had that this morning with I won't give away what it was, but I was talking to someone this morning who'd done the course, and they absolutely were convinced about one thing when in fact that was fake news. It was actually not true. Something else was true. So you'll get to see exactly what your learners would see if you were to build a hospitality course using this approach. If you are really, really interested, we also have, as I said, the course, we call it Vino, about wine and wine service, and we can potentially make that available for you to evaluate as well and to take a look at that. Typically, we are not a content company here at Area 9. We really provide a tool for you to be able to train your workforce on the menu or the process or health and safety, whatever it is. But we are partnering with key content providers who do have specialist content in those areas. And we're going to be doing more and more in hospitality. So there will be a library of off-the-shelf content. It's just pretty thin right now. I say the emphasis is much more about you helping you to take your own content and add this level of intelligence to it. Are there any more in here? So Christine, you said Relias. And I know Relias is a company that has a bunch of content. I'm not sure what the question is that you're asking. So if you could type something in there. We are not the only company that provides adaptive learning in the industry. We would say, wouldn't I, that we are the best. And by that, I mean twofold. So one is we've put a particular emphasis on not all adaptivity is equal. It takes an awful lot. We have spent, believe it or not, something like $100 million. We've had something like 30 million learners use this platform, particularly in higher ed. We spent something like $100 million developing the underlying technology that allows this to work its magic. The algorithms that power this are very robust and work across all kinds of industries. So this isn't an easy problem to solve. So certainly if you're looking at adaptive, be very careful. Various people make claims about how magic some of the things are. But as with all things in life, not all adaptive platforms are created equal. So the LMS, does it interface with the Relias LMS used in healthcare? Absolutely, yes. So we can absolutely drop this content. And although the focus has been on hospitality today, this platform And this approach works equally well if you're training medicine or sales training or compliance, whatever it happens to be. And compliance is a super low-hanging fruit because you get all the benefits of time saving because most people know most of it, but also you guarantee that they're proficient. We are at the top of the hour. I see we are just a couple of minutes away. So thank you for your attention. There will be some follow-up from James and the chart organization. We're certainly going to give you the coronavirus stuff, but anything else, please reach out.
Thank you, James and Nick. Thank you so much. Everyone, it was recorded. It will be posted on the website by the end of the day. If you would like to share this with anyone else, please feel free to. They can log into the chart website and view this at their own time.
Thank you all. And if you want to get in touch with us afterwards, if you've got any questions, please do so. My email is nick@area9.dk for Denmark, originally a Danish company. But if you reply to Tara or the folks at Chart or directly to James, they can get you in touch with us.